So, as you guys might know, I recently moved out of my parents' place and got one of my own. This gave me the perfect excuse to finally revisit the idea of a VR living room. The last room was cool, but man, that holodeck map was a horrible choice. This new place is, naturally, a lot smaller than my spot at my parents' house, meaning there are a lot more things to bump into in my play area, so this time I actually had some real motivation to get a working VR room together. My old spot was so open that it was really just for comfort and curiosity. This time, there's some real utility. Like I said, I really wanted to get away from that holodeck and set myself up in a place that I'd actually want to be. So, browsing the available environments, I downloaded a bunch and quickly found that photogrammetry mapping had gotten a lot more popular on the workshop since my original video. This is basically where you move a camera around a real-world environment, and then really smart software and a small human touch stitches the images together into a 3D rendering. It's really hard to describe just how cool this stuff is in VR. You may boot up Half-Life Alyx and think, oh wow, this practically looks like real life. But photogrammetry? Man, it's something else. Even with the obvious limitations of both the technique itself and the weaknesses of the AI involved, the photogrammetry environments I explored felt so incredibly real. In terms of pure visuals, the realest anything has ever felt in VR for me. I wanted to explore every little detail. I was blown away by how this plastic bag was realistically sitting there in all its crinkled up glory. I thought about how cozy this bed looked. My jaw went agape when I saw this huge hotel in this Hawaii environment, and I got a chill down my spine looking at the peak of Little Tahoma from atop Mount Rainier, all from the comfort of my living room. They even had a photogrammetric environment of the surface of Mars, as captured by the Curiosity rover, which included a handy little visualization of how photogrammetry data is recorded. This stuff is incredibly cool, it's mind-blowing. However, for my purposes, it wasn't going to cut it. The reason I picked the holodeck for my last VR room was because it was a nice blank slate. What I was looking for was an incredible view, preferably photogrammetric, and a fairly large, flat surface to simulate the floor of my living room. The porch of some ski lodge would be perfect. The other thing I had to keep in mind was that the default spawning location had to be outside, or somewhere that I can see the coolest parts of the environment. If I had to teleport to get to the good stuff, then suddenly I'd lose the spawn point as an anchor, and all of my furniture is no longer in sync with the real world. There were tons of cool environments that were really pleasant and fun to explore, but for my purposes, it was all null and void, because I needed something that didn't require any exploration. I wanted to just spawn in the best spot. Sure, I could have learned the basics of Hammer 2 and made my own environment that I was happy with, but I just didn't have time. Maybe someday I'll get around to it, but in the meantime, I needed to keep searching. I found one relaxing island level that had me spawning inside the fireplace. Eventually, I found out it had a spawn relocator tool, which got me thinking about setting up on this front porch, with a nice view of the dock. I spent 5 to 10 minutes lining up the spawn point perfectly, only to realize that whenever I reloaded the environment, that spawn point wasn't saved, and it was a bust. Then I went to this little campground environment that was a bit too sparse for my liking, and had me spawning inside a tent. Then, it was on to the city from Mirror's Edge. Let me tell you, I had a mission in mind, but it was so damn easy to get distracted exploring all of these environments that were super cool but didn't fit my purposes. Then on top of that, you've got the motion sickness. Either the tracking on the Vive Cosmos had somehow gotten even worse with updates, or I had lost my VR legs, seeing as I haven't spent much substantial time in VR since around Halloween. But anyways, how about this Mirror's Edge environment? It's one of my favorite games, it's pretty as hell, and it's full of long, flat areas. Should be perfect for my purposes, and well, it had a lot of issues. I'm fairly certain the door and ceiling panels are dev textures. These bars aren't centered, the lights are just hovering there. One look out the window and you see what looks like GM flat grass. I don't know what the hell is up with this portal storage cube texture or the grass one on the perpendicular wall. The lighting occasionally bugged out for a couple of frames, and I think there was some sort of shader error projecting this grainy effect onto certain surfaces. But, well, there was something about it. Maybe it's because it was inspired by one of the most bombastic levels in one of my favorite games. Maybe it's because of that awesome yellow and sky blue color palette. Maybe I was just getting tired of searching, but I just liked it here. Now it was just second verse same as the first. Spend the evening getting all of my virtual furniture perfectly aligned with their real-world counterparts, do a bit of decorating, and take it for a spin. You know how this goes if you watched my first video. It's a really boring, tedious, but rewarding process. This right here is why AR, augmented reality, is so relevant to this conversation. I wouldn't have to do any of this meticulous and easy to mess up work if we were talking about AR. Here's the thing though, AR is basically only helpful for entertainment and productivity. What I'm talking about here is a living space, turning my living room into a more enjoyable place to be. The tech isn't there yet, or I should say the software hasn't been made yet, but if I could just walk around my room real quick and have my furniture scanned, I wouldn't have to settle so much, and I'd spare myself a lot of headache from the setup process. The reason this is preferred to AR in terms of a living space is of course that I can move my living room to wherever I want. I could add things in AR until I was blue in the face, but I couldn't change what was there in meat space. Here, however, it's just a couple of buttons and my living room was in a cool-ass hallway on the surface of Halo. Unless we're talking about seriously futuristic processing power, this just wouldn't be possible with AR. Essentially, the kind of room scanning I'm talking about would just be mixing photogrammetry with the ability to edit the textures of surfaces and remove walls or whatever else live without having to go into some crazy 3D modeling or mapping software. This is also some serious processing power, but unlike that crazy AR idea, this one's much closer to being attainable. I could go off and list some more gripes with Steam VR Home that I was reminded of by this experience, but I'd rather address the elephant in the room. Something I didn't really care to talk about in the last VR Room video, but that the comments brought up a ton. This is kinda like Ready Player One. I swear at least half the comments mentioned it, so let's explore this some. I haven't read the book or even seen the movie, but from what I understand, somebody made a free-to-use VR social app called the Oasis, and as the real world collapsed, people retreated to the Oasis more and more, to the point where your online persona and environment began to matter more than their real-world equivalents. Then, however, some megacorporation tries to give the Oasis some awful freemium economy, essentially turning quote-unquote real life into a garbage App Store game. That is, assuming I understand the plot correctly, pretty relevant to what I was talking about in the last VR Room video. It's no surprise that it was brought up so much in the comments. Not only that, it's a totally valid concern. The first thing I'll say is that, as much as I praised it in the first video, if you've spent any significant amount of time in VR, you'll quickly come to realize that it stops feeling so real after the first few hours. This stuff is in no way a supplement for real life. We'll need brain interfacing before we get to that level. Having a little digital home for yourself as seen in this video isn't going to make people just say screw it and let the real world go to hell. You definitely won't hear me saying it's okay that some people are forced to live in garbage homes because they can just have VR homes. It's more like, well, we live in a world where some people are forced to live in garbage homes. I bet having a virtual room to escape to would help a bit. Again, this is all extremely hypothetical, the tech just isn't there yet, but it's interesting to think about nonetheless. So to me, that's kind of the worst thing about living in the world of Ready Player One. My ideas here aren't about getting so comfortable in VR that the real world ceases to matter, it's more like, the real world is already collapsing, so this is better than nothing? I hate to sound like a pessimist, but, well, sometimes there's a place for pessimism. The other concern isn't as bad as the whole world falling apart thing, but it's a much more realistic one, I think. The corporatization of your whole life. If we ever get to a point where we socialize, learn, explore, work, and relax in VR, it isn't a stretch whatsoever to say that it would be easy for some corporation like Facebook or Amazon to make your whole life just a series of personalized advertisements, especially if this stuff takes the form of brain interfacing rather than virtual reality. Sex becomes a microtransaction, education becomes pay to win, being a painter becomes a season pass. Could these things be done on some free alternative to what we might as well call the Oasis? Sure, but would that take off to any substantial degree? I seriously doubt it. I'm reminded of DuckDuckGo. It's a search engine that prioritizes your privacy above all else. Unlike Google, Bing, Yahoo, or whatever, DuckDuckGo doesn't track your activity and sell that data to advertising groups. It works just fine, you'll find what you need, and you won't have those creepy moments where you pull out your phone to Google something and the first suggestion is exactly what you wanted to Google, as if your phone was listening to your conversation. So why doesn't the whole world use DuckDuckGo instead of Google? Well, if you ask me, we just live in a world where monopolies emerge naturally, especially when technology's in the mix. Microsoft basically has a monopoly on desktop operating systems, Steam has barely ever been challenged by anybody for online PC game distribution, pretty much every private email address in the world is a Gmail account, Vimeo is hardly even a bug on YouTube's window, I hardly ever meet any adults who don't have Spotify Premium, accepting monthly donations through any service but Patreon is just shooting yourself in the foot, being a social gamer without a Discord account is just weird, the list goes on and on and on. Are there alternatives to all of these services? Sure, but they hold such substantial market shares that it's hard to imagine a world where a different service dethrones them, or even threatens them. Something like this will absolutely happen if we ever live in a world like that of Ready Player One. I'm reminded of what might be the most cynical video on my whole channel, Tacoma, A Greedy Utopia. In it, I talk about how technologies that have the power to completely reshape the world we live in for the better are pretty much always going to be employed in incredibly greedy ways. If we had all of the technology of Star Trek, we wouldn't suddenly be in this amazing utopian state. Replicators won't save us, AI-driven asteroid belt mining won't save us, teleportation won't save us, light-speed travel won't save us, mass automation of labor won't save us. All that these things will do is further the divide in power between normal people and corporations. In my VR bedroom video, I talked about the potential of this technology. What I failed to talk about is how that potential will almost definitely be squandered by corporate greed. Hey, sorry this fun video about speculating on the future is getting so depressing. Let's continue. So I'm sort of straying from the point here and getting into some broader societal problems, so let's talk about what a de facto monopoly of a VR social app would look like. We won't get into what could happen with brain interfacing, it's just way too much for me to get into for now. We'll just write our own little version of Ready Player One. Let's start with some world building. The real world basically still works. You can still go on a hike and breathe in the fresh mountain air. You can still run to the store where someone will bring your Arizona tea and candy or your groceries out to your car. At lower end stores in rural areas, you still have to go inside though. You can still go to the drive-thru at McDonald's or get your oil changed or try out a mattress or try on clothes. Tons of physical businesses are still operating, the postal service is bigger than ever, but these are generally considered lowlier jobs. Only two types of people still work physical jobs, the lower class and the super rich. Actors, doctors, really high-end jobs like that. Pretty much all middle-class people who are viewed as having any serious career ambitions are doing their work in VR. Sales, video editing, meetings, management, web design, education, creating environments for what we'll continue calling the Oasis, running simulations, overseeing AI training. Basically, any job that can be done remotely in 2021, and a bunch of new ones that emerge through the creation and normalization of the Oasis. In terms of pleasure, it isn't at all uncommon for a group of friends to get some drinks delivered to their homes, or get it themselves from the store, and pony up a small fee to get a private virtual room, maybe a high-end bar or a resort in the Himalayas, to chill out and drink with each other, or maybe they pay a bit more and catch a movie together in VR. Maybe one of them is subscribed to the Drinking Games Pass, and they all play something not too different from Jackbox. What about just relaxing at home when you aren't working? Well, it's all about subscriptions. Maybe some people are subscribed to Walmart's home decoration package, others have the signature Amazon package or the Martha Store package from Target. Most people's physical homes are somewhat sparsely decorated. What's more important than aesthetics is that they've got real-world equivalents to critical pieces of furniture that they have in VR with their subscriptions. In the Oasis, however, so long as they keep up with their payments, they've got some pretty nice stuff. After all, this is the public-facing side of the house. So long as your virtual room is nice and spacious enough for other people to project their couches or chairs when they visit, you're ready to entertain virtual guests. And as long as you keep up with Hulu, Netflix, HBO Now, YouTube, or whatever else fancies your interest, you've got all the screens you could want and resolutions that are only limited by bandwidth and the physical resolution of your headset's display. Education is of course also done remotely in the Oasis. Depending on which institution you subscribe to, your kid gets to go on crazy virtual field trips. Really, things aren't bad at all. Remember, this isn't some fascist government, it's a business, and they've got to be able to market this stuff. But the big issue is that every room you enter is a, let's say, Facebook brand room. Nowadays, the only time you're really bombarded with ads is when you're on some device. The Walmart intercom, the billboards on the interstate, the adverts on the radio, none of them can compete with how many ads you see online. Well, if Facebook or Google or Amazon owned your bedroom, your vacation spot, your movie theater, your office space, your bar, well, let's just say adverts would become a major factor in your life. Sure, there'd be subscription services to get rid of some of the ads, but it'd be expensive, and just one subscription wouldn't cut it if you wanted to be totally ad-free. You'd need multiple. The way I see it, that's kind of what the Oasis would really be all about. Microtransactions and subscriptions, and that is a slippery as all hell slope. Remember, the real world is still totally usable, but if you don't want to work a totally dead-end job, you're going to need to spend a whole hell of a lot of your time in the Oasis, and for those who don't make decent money, it's a horrible place to spend your life. Imagine if Amazon could make you pay monthly for the privilege of decorating your cubicle a certain way, in a company that Amazon doesn't even own. That's what we're talking about, the honest-to-God corporatization of our very lives. Again, this is all about as hypothetical as it gets, but it's pretty fun to think about if you ask me. What this all boils down to is one simple fact. The technology itself is incredible, and has tons of potential to improve the living conditions of so much of mankind. However, there's way too much money to be made by charging an arbitrary price for that improvement. Before I see you all off, I'd like to apologize for having such a depressing video, and as always, verbally thank the patrons for supporting this sort of content. I'd especially like to thank the patrons who are donating $10 or more monthly, such as Alex Vanderwood, Almost Dead Again, Anatoly Volnov, Andrew Melnick, Arthur D. Gonzalez-Martin, Benny, Big Time Jim, Colin Gajic, Cosmo Borski, Daniel Christman, Darius Fazier, David Kaiser, Dominic Johann, Duncan Bristow, Fralum, In Bloom, Jack Eisenberg, Jano, John Strange, Cale Graybill, Mello, Mixer Rules, Money and Muses, Patio Furniture, Perks 3D, Cielo, Yimin Shi, and Young Master Pig. I also just wanted to say that now that my internet's improved, I'm going to be doing some live streaming on the second channel, Pork Brain, which you can find the link to in the description. Mostly, it's just going to be vibing streams where, we just put on some copyright-safe music, and I, answer comments and just relax with you guys. Kind of just playing the role of the anime girl on the lo-fi stream, really, except I talk to you. And other than that, I'm of course going to be doing some gaming, with friends or without, whatever. I already streamed Hunt Down the Freeman, and that was a disaster. So anyways, I hope to see you guys there. Have a great week.